All right, here's your homework. So the first equation for your homework was x cubed plus x squared minus 5x plus 3. And we're going to go together and we're going to graph this. And I'm going to take you through the steps. So the first step is we're going to create a list. We're going to look at the last number and take all the numbers that go into 3 evenly. Thankfully, it's a short list. And then we're going to divide with one of those numbers into 1, 1, negative 5, and 3. We want to find which one will give me 0. And if it doesn't work, we try again. So this one, negative 1, make sure I did it correctly. Doesn't work. That's okay. Positive 1. Should have started there anyways. Let's see if positive 1 works. See, it's okay if you realize, wait a second, it didn't give me 0. So we'll try again. Add and multiply, and then add and multiply all the way across. This one does work. And then we're left with x squared plus 2x take away 3. Again, press pause so you don't get too far behind. We're going to factor this. That's negative 3 and 2. And then we're going to write down the factors. So I want to write down the equation as factors. So we have x plus 3. We have x minus 1. And then this one, the one that worked, 1 is a 0. How do I work backwards? The opposite number is the factor. So that's going to be x minus 1. So when I put this together, I have x plus 3 and then x minus 1, which is x minus 1 squared. Now I'm going to write down the zeros and the multiplicity. So each factor has a 0 and a multiplicity. So again, press pause if I get too fast. So the 0 is negative 3. The exponent is odd, which means it's going to cross the x-axis. Here the 0 is positive 1. The exponent is even, so it's going to bounce on the x-axis. We're also going to write down the y-intercept. The y-intercept is always the last number. So when you plug in 0, the very last number is always your y-intercept. We're going to write down the end behavior using the leading term. So the leading term is positive with an odd exponent. So we're going to write down the end behavior. So the right end, the function goes up. The left end, as x approaches negative infinity, the function goes down. And now we're ready to graph. So I'm going to draw a graph here. Again, press pause. I don't want to get ahead of you. Once you're ready to graph, look at your zeros and find them. So that's negative 3 and positive 1. The y-intercept, which we said was 3. And then the right end goes up and the left end goes down. So I need to fill in any empty points between the zeros. So we have an empty at negative 1 and another empty at negative 2. So we're going to use synthetic on the side to get those answers. So at negative 1, again 1, 1, 1, negative 5, and 3. Again, you can create your columns if it's easier. Make sure I did it correctly. So negative 1, I think I did that up here too, right? 8. So negative 1 gives you 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's way up here. I'm okay with that. Then negative 2. Oh, I wonder if it's going to be higher. We'll see. 1, negative 5, and 3. And again, press pause and try it. Can you divide? Make sure I did it correctly. Negative 2, that's negative 1. Positive 2, negative 3, that's 6. All right, so that gives me 9. That is a little higher. So 1 up a little more. Right here. It's going to be okay. So it kind of goes up into my work, but that happens. I'm going to connect like a wet noodle right there, all the way through it. And then make my graph. And now my graph is complete. The last thing I want to write down are the relative max and the relative minimum. So the max is the high turning point. We just found was negative 2 and 9. And the min, that's the low turning point. That's where it bounced at 1, 0. There you go. There's one homework done. All right, let's do another one. The next homework question was f of x equals x cubed plus 3x squared minus 4. So again, I'm going to create a list using 4. So I'm going to write down all the numbers that go into 4 evenly. And then I'm going to divide to see if I can find. And now notice we're missing an x. We need a 0 where it's missing. I'm going to try a number. If it doesn't work, I'll try another number. So this one worked. What's left over is x squared plus 4x plus 4. We're going to factor it. Again, press pause when it goes too fast. Two numbers that multiply to 4 and add to 4. That's 2 and 2. All right, so now we're going to put this together. So x plus 2 is x plus 2 squared. And then positive 1, the opposite number, becomes x minus 1. Now I can write down the zeros and the multiplicity. So we'll start with x plus 2 squared. What's the 0 that comes from that? The exponent is even, so it's going to bounce at that number. The next factor is x minus 1. The 0 that comes from that is positive 1. The exponent on the outside is odd, so it's going to cross at that number. The y-intercept, that's always going to be the last number when you plug in 0. The end behavior, so it's the same end behavior, right? As x goes to infinity, the function goes up to the right. As x goes to negative infinity, the left end behavior, the left end goes down. So be comfortable writing your end behavior, your power term, all the parts you need of the graph. We're now ready to graph. When I start my graph, I'm going to start with my intercept. So negative 2 and 1. I put that on my graph. The y-intercept's at negative 4. And the right end goes up and the left end goes down. There's only one empty point number that I don't have, and that's here at negative 1. So I'm going to plug in negative 1 using synthetic substitution. So I'm going to use 1, 3, 0, and negative 4. And then I'm going to plug in to get my answer. Make sure I did it correctly. Double check. So I get negative 2. So at negative 1, I get negative 2. So then I'm going to connect all of this together, and I have my graph. The relative max is the high turning point. That's this one. That's at negative 1 and 2. My minimum, my low turning point. Oh, wait a second. Something happened here. What happened here? So at negative 2, it was going to bounce. So why is it at positive 2? So I made a mistake. Let's scratch that out and go to negative 2. Good to double check, right? To understand. So because it bounces, that point is here and follows the path of a bounce as it goes through. So my high turning point is actually at 0, is actually at negative 2 and 0. So at negative 2, 0, it bounces and then it crosses. The low turning point is at 0 and the y-intercept, which is at negative 4. All right, one more left. It's not about making mistakes, right? Double checking your work, checking to make sure the whole puzzle fits. And if it's not fitting, what did I do wrong? Last one. So it's x cubed plus 4x squared minus x minus 4. Again, that last number, what are all the numbers that go into 4 and then divide? So we're going 1, 4, negative 1, negative 4. And we're going to divide into that. And then which number would go in? I'm just going to try 1 again, right? And 1 works. And then I have x squared plus 5x plus 4. This is a good one to see. How far can you get before you watch the video and copy, right? And then two numbers that multiply to 4 and add to 5. So those numbers are 4 and 1. So now I have the factors. So I have this factor, and I have 4 and 1. And then the last factor, this 0 the opposite sign would be x minus 1. So none of these match, so they don't go together to make an exponent of 2. They're all separate. So I'm going to write down the zeros in multiplicity. So I write down the factor. I write down the 0. It has an odd exponent, so it's going to cross. I write down the factor. I write down the 0, which is -1. It has an odd exponent, so it's going to cross. I write down the last one. +1 has an odd exponent again, so each one is going to cross in this case. The y-intercept is always that last number. The end behavior, it starts with the power term. We've done like this every question. So as x approaches infinity, the function goes up. As x goes to -infinity, the function goes down. And then we're ready to graph. So the first thing I do on my graph is find the zeros and put them on the x-axis. So it's at -4, -1. There's -4, there's -1, there's +1. The y-intercept's at -4. And then we have empty points at -3 and -2. So at -3, I'm going to evaluate what that is. So I get 8. It's okay, a little bit up into my work. -2, let's see what that gives me. It's going to be lower. But let's see what that is. That's 1, 4, -1, -4. I get 6. Oh, and the right end goes up and the left end goes down, and then connect the points, and you have a great graph. Last thing is the relative maximum and the relative minimum. So we have a high turning point at -3 and 8, and we have a low turning point at 0 and -4. And you did it. So think of each piece, factoring, finding zeros, multiplicity, y-intercept, end behavior, filling in the empty points, and then connecting it all. Great job. I'm really proud of you for doing your homework. Until next time, Mr. G Math.